Ambassador Kimara felt her heart racing as she sat in the massive chamber of the Galactic Council. The room was huge, with walls that seemed to stretch forever upward, covered in strange symbols from dozens of different alien worlds. Around, her creatures from across the galaxy stared down with eyes that looked at humans like they were nothing more than insects. The Vorthak Chancellor stood at the center, his massive frame towering over everyone else. His skin looked like dark metal, and when he spoke, his mouth parts clicked together in a way that made Ara's skin crawl. Behind him, other alien leaders nodded in agreement. There was the crystal-like Zilani ambassador, whose body shimmered with different colors as she moved. The snake-like Thessarian representative coiled around his floating platform, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Let me make this very clear," the Vorthak Chancellor said, his voice booming through the chamber. "Humanity has exactly 72 hours to accept our generous offer. You will become a tributary species under the galactic hegemony. Your worlds will provide resources. Your people will serve our greater civilizations. This is not a negotiation." Ara tried to keep her face calm, but inside she was burning with anger. She had been Earth's ambassador for 5 years, and she had watched these aliens treat her people like children every single day. They acted like humans were some kind of cosmic joke, a species that had somehow stumbled into space travel by accident. The Thessarian representative slithered forward, his golden eyes fixed on Ara. "So your species discovered faster than light travel only 300 years ago," he hissed. "We have been crossing the stars for 50,000 years. The Vorthak Empire has conquered 1,000 worlds. The Zilani Confederation has built mega-structures that span entire solar systems. What could your infant civilization possibly offer except obedience?" More laughter echoed through the chamber. Ara had heard this same speech 100 times before. These aliens loved to remind humans how young and weak they were. They talked about their ancient empires, their incredible technologies, their thousands of years of wisdom. And every time Ara had to sit there and take it, because Earth's small fleet of ships couldn't stand against even one of their battle groups. But today was different. Today, something was happening that none of these aliens could imagine. Ara's earpiece crackled to life with a soft beep that only she could hear. The voice that came through was Director Park Jin, the head of Earth's Deep Space Command. She had known Park Jin for years, had worked with him on countless diplomatic missions. His voice was always steady, always professional. But right now, there was something else there, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. "Ambassador Ara," Park Jin's voice whispered in her ear. "This is Director Park Jin with authorization code Alpha 77. Protocol 7 is now authorized. I repeat, Protocol 7 is authorized. The sleepers wake tonight." Ara's breath caught in her throat. Protocol 7. She had heard whispers about it in the deepest levels of Earth's government, but she had never believed it was real. It was supposed to be a myth, a story that old military officers told each other late at night. But the way Park Jin said those words, with that strange edge in his voice, made her realize that maybe some myths were true. She stood up slowly, feeling every alien eye in the chamber focus on her. The Vorthak Chancellor's mandibles clicked, impatiently. "Well, human, do you have an answer for the Council? Will your species accept tributary status, or must we demonstrate why resistance is futile?" Ara looked around the chamber one more time. She saw the arrogant expressions on every alien face. She saw how they leaned back in their seats, completely confident that humanity would bow down just like every other weak species they had encountered. They had no idea what was coming. "I have a message from Earth's High Command," Ara said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "The sleepers are waking." For a moment there was complete silence, then the laughter started. It began with the Thessarian representative, a sound like steam escaping from a broken pipe. The Zilani ambassador's crystal body rang like bells as she shook with amusement. Even the normally stoic Vorthak Chancellor's mandibles clicked in what might have been alien laughter. "The sleepers," the Thessarian hissed between laughs. "What is this supposed to mean? Are you threatening us with your dreams, little human?" But Ara wasn't paying attention to their mockery anymore. Through her earpiece, she could hear something incredible happening. In the background of Park Jin's transmission, she could hear her alarms going off, voices shouting with excitement, and a sound she had never heard before, a deep, thrumming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Director, what's happening?" she whispered into her communicator. "Something beautiful." "Ambassador," Park Jin replied, and for the first time in years she heard him laugh. "Something that's been waiting for this moment for 10,000 years. The deep archives are responding. Stasis fields are powering down across the solar system. The fleet is waking up." While the aliens in the chamber continued to laugh at her, "Message." Ara felt a chill run down her spine. Not from fear, but from anticipation. These creatures had no idea that humanity had been keeping a secret for longer than any of their civilizations had existed. They thought humans were newcomers to space, primitive children playing with technology they barely understood. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As the laughter died down, the Vorthak Chancellor stepped forward. "Return to your tiny world, human. Tell your leaders that they have 72 hours to surrender. After that, we will show you what happens to species that dare to defy the natural order of the galaxy." Ara smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "I'll be sure to pass along your message," she said, "but I think you might want to check your long-range sensors in the next few hours. You're about to see something very interesting." The aliens exchanged confused looks as Ara turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she could hear them starting to argue among themselves, trying to figure out what her words meant. But it didn't matter anymore. The secret that humanity had kept hidden for millennia was finally about to be revealed. The sleepers were waking, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 miles beneath the Pacific Ocean, in a place so deep that sunlight had never touched it, Admiral Li Tay stood in a chamber that shouldn't have existed. The walls around him weren't made of metal or stone, but of something that looked like living crystal, pulsing with a soft blue light that seemed to come from within. The air itself felt different here, charged with energy that made his skin tingle. Li Tay had been preparing for this moment his entire life. His father had prepared him, just as his grandfather had prepared his father, and so on back through countless generations. For 10,000 years, his family had been guardians of a secret so incredible that most people would have called it impossible. But now, as he placed his palm against the crystalline interface, he felt the ancient systems recognizing his DNA, his bloodline, his right to be here. The interface was warm under his touch, and suddenly the chamber filled with light. Symbols appeared in the crystal walls, writing in a language that predated every known civilization in the galaxy. But Li Tay could read it perfectly, because the knowledge had been passed down through his family like a sacred trust. "Admiral," came a voice from behind him. Captain Yun Na stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched the ancient systems come to life around them. She was young, only 32, but she had been chosen for this mission because her family line was also one of the Guardians. "The readings are incredible. These systems are responding to genetic markers that go back 10,000 years. Li Tay nodded, his eyes fixed on the data streaming across the crystal displays. "Status report, Captain. How many sites are responding?" Yun Na checked her tablet, but the numbers were almost too big to believe. "Sir, we're getting signals from everywhere. The hidden facility under Antarctica is powering up. The stations buried in the asteroid belt are coming online. Even the deep space caches that we thought were lost forever are sending response signals." For a moment, Li Tay felt the weight of history pressing down on him. His family had kept this secret for 300 generations. They had watched as humanity forgot its true past, as people began to believe that they were newcomers to space, that they had only recently discovered how to travel between the stars. But that was all a lie, carefully maintained to protect the greatest secret in the galaxy. The truth was that humanity had once ruled the stars, not hundreds of years ago, but thousands, 10,000 years ago, when the aliens who now called themselves the ancient powers were still learning to make fire. Humans had built an empire that spanned half the galaxy. They had been teachers, explorers, peacemakers. They had helped countless species develop technology, medicine, art. They had been the galaxy's first great civilization, but something had gone wrong, something so terrible that humanity had been forced to make an unthinkable choice. "Sir," Yun Na said, her voice shaking with excitement, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the solar system. The stasis fields are disengaging exactly as planned. Whatever our ancestors built, it's all waking up at once. Li Te took a deep breath. Then it's time. Initiate full awakening protocol. Send the authorization codes to all sites simultaneously. His fingers moved across the crystal interface, entering commands that had been memorized by his family for a millennia. Each code was a piece of genetic information, a key that could only be turned by someone with the right bloodline. As he worked, he thought about his great-grandfather who had told him stories about the old times when he was just a child. Stories that everyone else thought were fairy tales. Long ago, his great-grandfather had said, "Our people didn't crawl up from caves and slowly learned to reach the stars. We fell from the stars and had to crawl back up. We were giants once, boy. Giants who chose to become small so that we could survive." Now, as the ancient systems responded to his touch, Li Te finally understood what those words meant. Throughout the solar system, things that had been sleeping for 10,000 years began to stir. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, what looked like ordinary space rocks suddenly split open like flowers blooming. Inside each one was a ship, massive and sleek, made from materials that current science couldn't even identify. The ship stretched and unfolded, systems coming online after millennia of perfect preservation. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, another facility awakened. The ice above it began to crack and steam as incredible energies powered up below. More ships emerged, these ones even larger than the ones in the asteroid belt. They rose through the ice like whales surfacing from an ocean, their hulls shining with patterns that seemed to shift and change as you looked at them. On the far edge of the solar system, near Pluto, space itself seemed to tear open. Ships emerged, from what looked like holes in reality, vessels so massive that they had been hidden in pocket dimensions to keep them safe. These weren't just starships, they were mobile cities, each one large enough to hold millions of people. "My God," Yunna whispered, staring at her readings. "Admiral, I'm counting over 50,000 ships, and they're not just ships. Some of these things are the size of moons. How did we hide all of this?" Li Te smiled, feeling a pride that went deeper than his own lifetime. "We didn't hide them, Captain. Our ancestors did. They built this fleet when humanity was at its peak, then put it all to sleep when the Great Crisis came. They knew that someday their descendants would need these ships again." The crystal interface was now blazing with light, showing him data, streams from across the galaxy. The fleet was awakening exactly as planned, each ship running diagnostics, checking systems, preparing for whatever came next. But more than that, the ships were remembering. They carried within them the knowledge and history of humanity's first empire, information that had been lost to the surface world for thousands of years. "Sir," Yunna said, her voice filled with awe, "I'm getting reports from Earth orbit. People are seeing lights in the sky, massive objects that weren't there an hour ago. The news networks are going crazy. They don't know what's happening." Li Te nodded. Soon the whole galaxy would know. The secret that his family and dozens of others had protected for 10,000 years was about to be revealed. Humanity wasn't the young, weak species that everyone thought they were. They were the children of the galaxy's first great empire, and their inheritance was finally awakening. The ancient fleet was rising, and with it, the true history of humanity among the stars. War Admiral Kess stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, watching the blue marble of Earth grow larger on his main screen. Around him, his crew of Vorthak warriors clicked their mandibles in anticipation. This was going to be easy. Humans were weak, their technology primitive, their military laughable. In a few hours, Earth would surrender, and the Vorthak Empire would have another trophy world to add to their collection. "Status report," Kess growled, his voice echoing through the bridge like grinding metal. "Sir, we're detecting minimal resistance," reported his tactical officer, a young Vorthak whose mandibles still gleamed with fresh polish. "A few orbital defense platforms, some patrol ships that looked like toys. Nothing that could threaten even our smallest destroyer." Kess nodded with satisfaction. Behind his flagship, 300 Vorthak warships moved through space like a school of mechanical sharks. Each ship was a kilometer long, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The humans had seen them coming for days now, and they hadn't even tried to run. Either they were incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Open. A channel to Earth, Kes commanded. Let's give these humans one last chance to surrender before we demonstrate our power. But before his communications officer could respond, something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to tear open. At first, it looked like someone had taken a knife and cut a hole in the darkness. The tear glowed with strange light, colors that had no names, energies that made Kes's instruments scream warnings. Then something began to emerge from the hole, something so massive that it blocked out the stars behind it. What in the void is that? Kes whispered, his mandibles trembling. The thing coming out of the tear wasn't a ship in any sense that Kes understood. It was more like a piece of a moon that someone had turned into a vessel. Its hull was smooth and dark, but as he watched, patterns of light began flowing across its surface like living circuits. The patterns pulsed with a rhythm that somehow felt familiar, like a heartbeat from a dream he couldn't quite remember. "Sir," his tactical officer said, his voice shaking. "I'm reading, this can't be right. That thing is 40 kilometers long. That's bigger than our entire command station." But the first ship wasn't alone. More tiers opened in space around Earth, and more impossible vessels emerged. Some looked like crystalline flowers blooming in the darkness. Others were sleek and predatory, shaped like ancient sea creatures from some alien ocean. The largest ones defied description entirely, their forms shifting and changing as if they were made of liquid starlight. "Battle stations!" Kes roared, but his voice came out as more of a squeak. "All ships prepare for combat. Whatever these things are, we'll show them the might of the Vorthak Empire." But his weapons officer was staring at his instruments with wide, terrified eyes. "Sir, I can't get a target lock. Our systems are saying these ships don't exist. The energy readings they're beyond our sensors' ability to measure." On the largest of the mysterious ships, something that dwarfed even Kes's flagship like a whale next to a minnow, lights began to flicker along its hull. The patterns grew brighter and more complex, forming symbols that seemed to write themselves across the ship's surface in letters of pure energy. Inside that massive ship, Commander OG stood on a bridge that looked nothing like anything the Vorthak could have imagined. The walls were alive, made of the same crystalline material that had awakened in the deep ocean chambers. Streams of light flowed through the crystal, like blood through veins, carrying information and energy throughout the ship. OG herself was young, barely 30, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had been born for this moment. Her family, like Admiral Lee Tays, had been guardians of the ancient knowledge. She had grown up hearing stories about the old ships, the vessels that humanity's ancestors had built when they ruled the stars. But even she had never imagined they would be this magnificent. The neural interface responded to her touch like it was greeting an old friend. As soon as her palm made contact with the warm crystal surface, she felt the ship's consciousness merge with her own. Suddenly, she could see through sensors that spanned dimensions, feel the ship's massive engines humming with power that could reshape solar systems, understand weapon systems that worked on principles her modern education couldn't even begin to explain. But more than that, she could feel the ship's memories. 10,000 years of sleeping, dreaming, waiting for this moment. The ship remembered the golden age of humanity, when Earth's children had spread across the galaxy as teachers and explorers. It remembered the great crisis that had forced humanity to hide its true nature. And it remembered the promise that someday, when the time was right, the fleet would wake up and reveal the truth to the galaxy. "This is Commander OG of the Terran Heritage Fleet," she said, her voice carrying across space on frequencies that the Vorthak ships couldn't even detect. But somehow, War Admiral Kes heard every word as clearly as if she was standing right beside him. "You are trespassing in predecessor space. This system is under the protection of the First Empire. Withdraw your forces immediately or face the consequences." Kes felt his heart stop beating. The First Empire. Every species in the galaxy had legends about the First Empire, the mythical civilization that had supposedly existed before recorded history. The beings who had built the ancient ruins that dotted every corner of the galaxy, who had left behind technologies so advanced that modern science could barely study them without breaking them. But those were just stories, legends, fairy tales that archaeologists told each other when they found artifacts they couldn't explain. "Impossible," Kess whispered. "The First Empire is a myth. It never existed." But as he watched, more ships continued to emerge from the tiers in space. Hundreds of them now, each one unique, each one radiating power that made his instruments weep. His tactical officer was frantically trying to count them, but the numbers kept changing as more vessels materialized. "Sir," the tactical officer said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm reading energy signatures that match the ancient ruins on Vorthak Prime, the ones our archaeologists have been studying for centuries. These ships, they're using the same technology." Kess's mandibles clicked uncontrollably as the truth began to sink in. The ruins on his homeworld, the mysterious artifacts that had helped his people develop faster than light travel, the ancient star maps that had guided the Vorthak Empire to its first conquests, they had all come from humanity. The humans weren't primitive newcomers to space. They were the descendants of the galaxy's first great civilization, and now they were awake and they were angry. The largest ship moved closer, its massive bulk blotting out Earth behind it. Along its hull, those strange symbols continued to write themselves in languages that predated every known civilization. "Final warning," Commander OG's voice echoed across space. "Leave this system now, or discover why your ancestors learned to fear the dark between the stars." War Admiral Kess looked at his fleet of 300 warships, each one a masterpiece of Vorthak engineering, each one capable of conquering worlds. Then he looked at the impossible vessels surrounding Earth, ships built by beings who had been gods when his people were still learning to make fire. For the first time in his long military career, War Admiral Kess gave an order he had never thought he would give. "All ships," he said quietly, "retreat." Commander OG felt her consciousness expand beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. The moment her mind fully connected with the ancient ship's neural network, 10,000 years of history flooded into her awareness like a dam bursting. She gasped, her knees buckling as images, sounds, and sensations from humanity's forgotten past overwhelmed her senses. She saw Earth as it had been millennia ago, but not the primitive world that history books described. Instead, she witnessed a planet that gleamed like a jewel, with cities that floated among the clouds and spaceports that stretched from horizon to horizon. Massive ships, even larger than the one she now commanded, rose from Earth's surface every day carrying humans to distant stars. "Commander, are you all right?" came the concerned voice of Dr. Choi Wu, the ship's chief archaeologist. He was standing nearby, his own hands pressed against a smaller neural interface, his eyes wide with wonder as he accessed different memory banks. "I'm fine," G managed to say, though she felt anything but fine. The visions were so real, so vivid, that she could smell the air of ancient Earth, could feel the excitement of explorers setting off for unknown worlds. "Dr. Choi, what are you seeing in the records?" Choi Wu's voice shook with emotion as he read from the flowing streams of data that appeared in the crystal walls around them. "Commander, these records go back 10,000 years. They show contact with over 300 different species across the galaxy. But we weren't conquerors or traders, we were teachers." More images flashed through G's mind. She saw human explorers arriving at worlds where primitive aliens were just beginning to understand fire. The humans didn't enslave or exploit these species. Instead, they shared knowledge. They taught agriculture to hungry civilizations, showed them how to heal diseases, helped them reach for the stars. She watched as humans helped the early Vorthak people develop their first metals, showed them how to build tools and weapons. The Yeo Vorthak had worshipped these human teachers as gods, building temples in their honor. But over time, the memory of humanity's role had faded, replaced by legends of mysterious sky gods who had vanished into myth. "The Thessarian writing system," Choi Wu said, his voice filled with amazement. "It's based on ancient human mathematics. The Zalani crystal technology, we invented it and taught it to them when they were still living in caves. Commander, every major civilization in the galaxy owes its existence to us." Ji saw the truth of it in the memories flowing around her. Humanity hadn't been one species among many. They had been the first to reach the stars, the first to develop faster than light travel, the first to build truly advanced technology. And instead of keeping these gifts for themselves, they had shared them freely with every species they encountered. The humans of that age had been explorers and scientists, philosophers and artists. They had built magnificent cities on 1,000 worlds, created art that spanned solar systems, written poetry in languages that could only be spoken in the vacuum of space. They had been everything that the current human race aspired to be and more, but the visions weren't all beautiful. As G delved deeper into the ship's memories, she began to see darker images. She saw human colonies going silent one by one, their signals simply stopping as if entire worlds had been erased from existence. She saw panicked messages from the outer rim of human space, reports of something terrible moving through the galaxy like a plague. "Dr. Choi," she said, her voice tense. "Are you seeing anything about something called the Void Touched?" The archaeologist's face went pale as he accessed those particular memory files. "Commander, you need to see this. The records show that around 10,000 years ago, something invaded our galaxy from outside, something that the records call the Void Touched. They weren't from our universe at all." The images that flooded G's mind now were terrifying beyond description. She saw creatures that seemed to be made of living darkness, beings that could move through space without ships, entities that could drain the life from entire worlds just by touching them. They weren't interested in conquest or resources. They seemed to exist only to destroy, to turn everything they touched into empty, lifeless void. "They moved through space like a cancer," Choi Wu continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Every world they touched became dead space, not just the life on the surface. They somehow drained the very energy from matter itself. Stars went dark, planets cracked apart. Even space itself seemed to break." G watched in horror as the memories showed humanity's desperate fight against this impossible enemy. Human fleets that had been built for exploration and peaceful contact were retrofitted for war. Weapons were created that could tear holes in reality itself. Scientists worked day and night to find some way to stop the Void Touched before they consumed the entire galaxy. But conventional weapons were useless. The Void Touched existed partially outside normal space and time. They could phase in and out of reality, making them almost impossible to fight. Every battle humanity won seemed to cost them more than defeat would have. They were losing, G realized, the ship's memories making the truth crystal clear. Humanity was the most advanced species in the galaxy, and they were still losing. "Yes," Choi Wu confirmed, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the final days of humanity's first empire. But they found a way to stop them. A terrible way. The memories showed G the ultimate weapon that humanity had created in their desperation. It wasn't a bomb or a ship or anything physical. It was a device that could rewrite the fundamental laws of reality itself, a machine that could banish the Void Touched from this universe entirely. But using it came with a price that made G's heart break. The weapon would work, but it would also collapse the quantum foundations that held humanity's empire together. Every faster-than-light ship would stop working. Every advanced city would lose power. Every piece of technology that made human civilization possible would simply shut down. "They knew it would destroy everything they had built," she whispered, watching as humanity's leaders made the most painful decision in history. But they did it anyway to save the galaxy. The final memories were the hardest to watch. She saw humans across 1,000 worlds saying goodbye to each other, knowing they would never speak again once the weapon fired. She watched as the greatest civilization in galactic history voluntarily destroyed itself to save species that didn't even know they existed. The weapon worked. The Void Touched were banished from this reality, sent screaming back to whatever dark dimension they had come from. But the cost was everything humanity had built. Their cities went dark. Their ships fell silent. Their colonies were cut off from each other, left to survive on their own or die trying. Most didn't survive. But some did, including the people of Earth. Over thousands of years, these survivors slowly rebuilt, but they had lost almost everything. The knowledge of who they had been, what they had accomplished, even the fact that they had once ruled the stars, all of it was forgotten, all except for a few families who had been chosen to remember, to keep the truth alive until the day when humanity would be ready to reclaim its heritage. "We were giants once," G said softly, understanding now what her grandmother had meant when she had told her those words as a child. "We saved the galaxy and lost ourselves in the process. But we're back now," Choi Woo said, his voice filled with wonder and pride. "The descendants of the First Empire have finally come home. Around them, the ancient ship hummed with power that had been sleeping for 10 millennia, ready to remind the galaxy who had really taught them to reach for the stars."